Hey people, it's Naya talking. Now this is a piece of black history and it's called Henrietta Lacks, the Mother of Modern Medicine, and this is an article from The Guardian. How did cells taken from a poor black woman in 1951 come to unlock some of the biggest advances in science? Henrietta Lacks, a 31-year-old mother of five, died of cervical cancer on 4th of October 1951. And while the disease was a tragedy for her family, for the world of medical research and beyond that, every one of us on the planet, it was something of a miracle. Because in the years since her death, Lacks cells taken from her tumor while she was undergoing surgery have been responsible for some of the most important medical advances of all time. The polio vaccine, chemotherapy, cloning, gene mapping, and IVF. All these health milestones and many more owe everything to the life and death of a young mother. Lacks cells, known as HeLa, using the first two letters of each of her name, become the first immortal human cell line in history. Scientists at the hospital where she died, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, have been working for years to try to start a continuously reproducing cell line, but the cells always died. Lacks were the first that took introducing a constantly reproducing line of cells that are literally, to give them their scientific definition, immortal. Ordinary cells taken from a human body and kept in a lab have a limited lifespan. However, an immortal cell line is cultured in a particular way, so it has the ability to proliferate indefinitely. Quite why hers were the cells that survived and reproduced when those of others of human patients has died is unclear, but the best guess is why. That the reason was linked to the ferocity of her tumor, which seems to have been made more virulent by the fact that she also suffered from syphilis. And I want to make a comment on that. Syphilis. Maybe there was a reason that they chose those black men to be infected with syphilis. Maybe they know some kind of a connection between the black genetic code and syphilis that they're not telling us, even after all these years. As soon as it was clear that HeLa would continue to reproduce, all kinds of research and experiments suddenly became possible. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. For a start, having living cells available outside the human body meant doctors could watch cell division taking place and could also see how viruses behaved inside the cells. What's more, it was possible to expose the cells to conditions that wouldn't have been ethical if they were inside a human body. For example, doctors could bombard them with carcinogens and watch the results. In the years since 1951, HeLa cells have been exposed to endless toxins and infections. They've been zapped by radiation and tested with countless drugs. And all this and much more has led to hundreds, if not thousands, of new pieces of knowledge and helped to shape the way medicine moved in the second half of the 20th century and the first decade of this one. And there are certainly plenty of HeLa cells to go around. These days, one researcher has estimated that if you laid them out all end to end, they'd wrap them around the planet at least 3 times. No one would be more surprised to know this than Lacks, who in her lifetime stood about 5 foot tall. For decades, while HeLa cells were routinely being used in laboratories around the world and were being hailed as pivotal in breakthrough after breakthrough, no one seemed to have stopped to think about the person behind them. Then 37 years after Lacks' death, a 16-year-old schoolgirl called Rebecca Scoot was sitting in a biology lesson when her teacher explained how cancer begins and said the process had been learned from studying cells in culture, HeLa cells. The cells, said the teacher, came from a woman called Henrietta Lacks. When the class was over, the other students filed out, but Scoot hung around. I said to my teacher, "Who is this woman, Henrietta Lacks? Where was she from? Did she have any kids?" But all the teacher knew was she was black, and she died in 1951 from cervical cancer. Okay, let's just go down. I don't want to see. Okay, what Scoots found out put the American health care system and beyond it, scientists everywhere who depend on patient goodwill but fail to communicate effectively in the dark. Because what she found out was that while Lacks cells were changing the face of modern medicine, her husband and children not only knew nothing about it, they were without adequate health care themselves. What most people are most shocked is that Henrietta's cells were taken without her knowledge and without her consent, says Clute. But that's standard practice here in the UK as in the US. If you sign a general consent form before surgery, any sample cells removed may be used for research later, and the doctors don't have to let you know. The general standpoint of medicine is that cells taken from an individual and used for research benefit the common good, so it's okay to use them. But Lacks' story shows that isn't true, certainly not in America. Anyway, Henrietta's cells were used to develop medical treatments, but those treatments were only available to people who could afford medical insurance. And impoverished families like the Lacks were exactly the sort of family who couldn't. Well, isn't that typical? A black person has created something amazing, but they're the only people who can't use it. To make matters worse, Lacks cells were making some people, pharmaceutical companies, rich. More specifically, cell banks and biotech companies were retaining vials of her cells. The current going rate for a tube of HeLa is around US $260, 174 pounds. But not a penny of the profits her cells had helped to generate went to her descendants, while their mother cells were soaring to worldwide scientific acclaim. Fortunes in the Lack family plummeted. I don't want to read this. This is just a sad story of how her kids have been mistreated. You can read that in the article when I leave it up. Okay, it was Lawrence's wife, Bobette, who was the first member of the Lax family to hear about Henrietta's cells. By chance, she met a cancer researcher. When she told him her name, the researcher remarked that he was working in a lab on some cells that came from a woman named Henrietta Lacks. Bobette said that had been her mother-in-law's name, but it couldn't be her because she'd been dead for years. And then the researcher explained that cells had been growing for years, ever since 1951, in fact. It was a crass way for a family to find out what happened to Lacks cells, but in fact, they would have found out anyway. The cell line had been contaminated, and scientists realized they needed to test Henrietta's descendants to work out what they had contaminated them. But when they came out to take cell samples, they didn't explain properly to Lax's what was going on, said screwed. Henrietta's children thought they were being tested for the cancer that had killed her. Deborah waited for months, thinking she was going to find out whether she'd die the same agonizing way her mother had. You see, they still don't even treat them as human beings. Well, you're just a thing that is going to provide something, sort of like taking oil from a well. You just need to smash through the ground and get it. One of the biggest issues her book says is how important it is for doctors and other health workers to communicate effectively with patients and their families. If you spoke another language and you need to see the doctor, you'd be provided with a translator. But if it's a science you don't understand, there's no one there to translate for you. So you go away simply not knowing what's being said. I think there should be science translators who are trained to communicate complicated medical stuff in a straightforward, easy to digest manner. It would have made a huge difference to Henrietta's family. And this is just trying to take the blame off. This is not complicated, all right? You just explain, we're going to take cells. Cells are what the body and this cancer organism is made of. And your body is made up of millions of cells. We're going to use the cells in research, and we're going to test things via these cells. Okay? It's not that hard. Okay? You don't need, it's not complicated, it's just the fact you didn't want to or think they were important enough to tell them. Okay, another question the book raises is likely to be even more pertinent in the future. As medical research becomes a bigger and multi-billion-pound industry, how much right do we have with the raw materials of our physiology? What right do the providers of the original sample their families have if the cell lines are found later to be worth patenting? Let's just skip over this. Meanwhile, in a cemetery in Virginia, where Henrietta Lacks was buried in an unmarked grave, a memorial has at last been erected. It is dedicated to the memory of a woman who says, touch lives in memory. No truer sentence has ever been inscribed. All right, well, I made a remark about the fact that maybe there's some kind of unique reaction with syphilis and the black genetic code that they don't know about. But there's other things. You heard what they said about, do people own the raw materials of their DNA and physiology once it's handed over? That's one of the other things. Stop, if you haven't already done it, do not hand over DNA to Ancestry.com, 23andMe, or any of these other companies. Okay, just don't do it. Secondly, stop putting your name on these organ donor cards. Thousands of black people disappear every year, okay? I mean, we've all heard, well, some of you have heard the story about that teenager in Illinois who got found rolled up in that gym mat with his organs missing and filled with sawdust, or that kid in Louisiana who was found in a lake with his organs missing. So you need to get that organ, if you're on any organ donor list, get yourself off that. Just because they are using that, I think, to find people who are suitable to have their organs harvested. And this stuff is never new. I mean, during slavery, they were cutting up black women while they were alive without anesthetic to find out how the human body and the human reproductive system worked. You know, the study of obstetrics and gynecology owes much of it to the experiments conducted on black women. But even today, black women are some of the most likely to die during childbirth because many times the doctors don't take them seriously. Even Serena Williams, who has all this money, said she almost died during childbirth because the doctors just didn't take her complaint seriously. And I would say this, that all the diseases that are currently affecting Africans, specifically HIV, AIDS, and Ebola, I believe that they are man-made. They were cooked up in a laboratory. Because when you think about common sense, about the enormous strength of the African genetic code and the fact that Africans are more healthier when they are fed a proper diet that is suited to their physiology, it makes no sense that they should be affected and afflicted with so many diseases. It just does not make any sense unless someone is doing it on purpose. Okay, and it brings me to another point. North Sentinel Island. Somebody commented that they have DNA that is the same DNA as the first human beings. And I think that's one of the reasons why the missionary was sent there, to open the way up to gain access to the islanders so they could start testing them and harvesting genetic material from them. So they need to be kept away from the North Sentinel Islanders for their own protection. Anyway, I'm a bit tired. But anyway, I hope that this has been good. I know I skipped over some bits, so I'm going to leave the article in the description so you can read it in its entirety. And you can find that woman's book online. Again, you can find the name of the book in the article. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. If you would like to donate to the MyGoFundMe, I'll leave that in the description. If you want to find my Instagram page, I'll leave that in the description. Peace, family.